where we're going to bring to you all the information about the pagan world from our point of view. It's the beginning of an ensemble show. And tonight, the first two co-hosts is myself, Ed the Pagan, world-renowned communicator across the world to try to bring you the voices of the pagan world on a daily basis. And I've done that for a number of years, and the Daily Spell was the first way to do it, along with Reverend Don Lewis. Hi, Don.
Hello.
He was there right at the beginning of that, helping us to write spells that would eventually give birth to almost everything we've done on the internet.
Yes, indeed.
And so, yeah, so we're out talking across the internet, and we can see the chat overlay. If you put anything into the various chat rooms, we can, or you can be just watching on Roku, where you're not going to be able to see be able to interact with us. If you want to answer us, Magic TV is live right this moment. There's a great place to communicate, or any number of Facebook pages, including the Pagan World Project.
Yes.
So let's talk about the Daily Spell really quick. What are we doing tonight?
What we do every night, try to take over the world.
You know, people aren't supposed to know that,
Well, that's true.
Yeah. And
welcome, Stuart.
And Mary Meat. So no, but it is an old joke. People used to make us Pinky in the Brain. They used to make a lot of jokes in the early days that we were doing.
Yes.
We were so aggressive on the net, and we were trying to do so well, and we were moving along so quickly. People were saying, "Oh, you're just trying to take over the world," and the answer was yes. We actually got a map that shows we got people from everywhere in the world out there, and today we communicate on a global basis, primarily in English for us, and some of our members speak English, Tagalong, and there's a number of other languages.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, mostly we speak in English right now, and we're hoping to have more programming that does include more diversity,
Yes.
as always. So the Daily Spell began officially on November 11th, 1998.
Long time ago.
A long time ago. You'll find out Magic Match shares an anniversary with a number of things we do. We tend to have two big anniversary dates, September 4th, which is Corellian Day, and November 11th, which is also known as Armistice Day, but it is also known to us as a very special day, where a lot of what we do, we kind of anniversary it. And we do that because we don't want scattered anniversaries across the world. We want to celebrate big moments at big times.
Yes.
So
and certain dates have a certain energy.
Yeah.
I mean, November 11th is 11/11, and 11
Mhm.
energy has run very strongly through everything we've done. We want to say hello to Michael and Mary in the chat. And rabbit energy runs through everything we do.
Yeah. And this is the year of the rabbit, so it's very strong, very powerful. So people who aren't paying attention, I guess January 23rd, 21st, somewhere in there,
I
there's the
believe
New
it's
Year.
the 22nd.
Right.
21st or 22nd, depending on exactly where you are.
Right. And then that becomes the black. And this year, they're explaining that certain colors have emotions. Yes. I am sparking in the metaverse today. So, and that's going to.
The Blackwater Rabbit.
So, on this show, we're going to talk about very contemporary Mary Meet. Everybody, we're going to talk very contemporary paganism. We're going to talk about what's happening in today. We're been talking around. And one of the things we're going to talk about is that we did a show on New Year's Eve that went into the early hours. We talked a lot of it. People really liked that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are needing to communicate with our community. And this is the fastest way we can communicate to us, and we want to help drag it in. If you want to be on this show, Pagan World TV at gmail.com, Pagan World Projects on Facebook, or Pagan World on energy and everything else. I guess we had an echo for a moment. That's gone away. Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with my USB ports. I'm a little annoyed, but it happens. I'm not going to argue.
It happens.
And so in talking crowdfunding, you're into the third day or the second day of your own Kickstarter campaign.
Yes, for Reverend Don's Super Omnibus of Magical Incantations and Invocations for All Occasions by myself, Reverend Don Lewis, and Sir Mary Ann Kay. It is a grimoire of spells and artwork, almost 200 pages. It has never been available as a book before. It was once available as a download. Um, and it has beautiful, beautiful entries in it.
And there you go. And we're going to talk more about Kickstarter. We want to talk, if you have a Kickstarter project coming up and you want to talk about it, if you're a vendor and want to talk about it, we want to talk about stores, we want to talk about everything. There's nothing in the pagan community that isn't on the table right now that we're willing to talk with.
Mm-hmm.
And really quick, I'm going to show my screen here. Hopefully I can do that. And all right.
And we want to say hello to Eric and Melanie.
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing that?
No.
No.
Not yet.
I don't know why. Okay. It worked last night.
That's odd.
Yeah.
Because it did work the other night.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I don't need to.
I have a share screen button.
Yeah. Okay,
Is,
go ahead and share. If you can.
What am I sharing? The Kickstarter page?
Never mind. We don't need to show it. But today at Wild Hunt, yesterday, they did have wish lists for American Paganism 2023 edition.
Yes.
And I thought this was well run. So I think I want to run through this really quick. I think this is something to start our statement on, some of the things we believe in as well.
And the article is by Carl E.H. Siegfried.
Mm-hmm. And so pagans, so there are 10 ideas that he's trying to get across, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very good. Pagans joining social progress organizations as individuals while being outspoken about their pagan perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying if we want to work for higher, better tomorrow, we don't need to start from scratch, but we can cooperate with other organizations.
Yes, indeed.
And
but it's important to represent while we're doing so.
I think that's really important. I agree with that. And I have done that. Actually, most people don't know. I'm actually a member of the rebellion. Oh wow! Suddenly brain fart. Mark Spart, Greta Thunberg. I actually do a lot of things that are basically around that activism.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a community, we generally claim we believe in these things. And we certainly don't need to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, I think it is a very important thing to join with people who are already doing some of these things, since they're well on.
And I think it takes us right in another one. Pagans taking leadership in climate change activism. Whether we embrace world-affirming religious traditions, honor the gods and goddesses of the earth, or give gifts to the spirit of the land, our various forms of paganism have special relationships with our environment. Let's be bold about this. Let's speak out about this. Let's write about this. And let's take action about this. I agree.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've often remarked upon the fact that we were among the first people talking about these things, the pagan community. And yet, as they became mainstream, we did not tend to go with them.
Where's our terraformers? Where's the people that are planetologists? Where are the environmental scientists? Why did we end up with a generation of people who didn't practice that? So, yeah. I mean, I think that this is really important.
I agree it's an important part of the future.
So we're going to be involved with that as well.
I like to point out that climate change is very mainstream now. The first place I ever heard ideas of climate change was the metaphysical community. It was a huge topic back in the 1970s and early 80s.
Yeah.
And yet, as it became mainstream, where are the pagans? Only a few people.
Well, you've got Starhawk, who's a major. You've got
there are a few.
Miss Geraldine. We got a few. Mark Brown out of St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've had.
But as we go forward, hopefully, we'll do more.
Yeah, and I ran a worm business for years.
That's true.
Um, Number 8, and this one let me go ahead and read it first. Pagans running for local elected office, especially school boards. Here's a whole thing about it, about that we need to be at the local level, to force to fight the far right. Sometimes Christio Festus agenda on the rest. Let's get in this and challenge this light into darkness. The idea of it, we should run for local office because the Christian right's running for office. We've been saying that for years, but I think
At least 30 years we've been saying that.
right, but I also think getting into local elections and trying to get elected office when we have no foundations and no actual ability to do so. I
Hmm.
think there's a few people who can do it who've done really well in their community. But as a pagan, I don't think that we're ready. I think what we need to do is build our numbers up in an area so that we can help swing elections towards the candidates we want. That's
Hmm.
really a first step. So, yeah, we should be involving with that. But I think running for local offices, if you can, you should. And you should let us all know. But I
Hmm.
also think that we're not ready. We're not even close to being ready.
I would agree it's an aspirational goal toward the future.
Hmm.
But I do think it will become important. And as you're saying, we need to build up the foundation to do it.
Right.
And if we look at Christian dominionism, that's what they did.
Hmm.
I mean, they took their time to build the foundation, which is one of the reasons that they were able to become so strong.
Yeah. And yes, they
And
did do it through local school offices and they did it through all these methods. But they had a foundation in those communities.
mhm.
Okay.
And they built up the tools that they used to pursue those offices before they were actually pursuing them. The means of communicating with their people, the means of motivating their people. It wasn't like they just one day said, "Well, we're going to all run for office." That it was
Mhm.
a buildup of years.
Right. And yeah, everybody, if you have any questions you want to ask or you want to add anything to this, please feel free to do so in any of the chat rooms that are streaming across the internet. This is going to be the beginning of what is going to be an ever increasing transmitter across the web as we move forward. Okay, number 7, I think, is very important to me. Actually, it's crucial to me. I think that, yeah, I agree. Pagans entering interfaith spaces and acting as they belong at the table.
That's the word right there.
I like that one. This one to me is really super important. I've written before on the lack of pagan exclusion in interfaith organizations, but I do believe that with determined effort and spirit of gumption, we can change the narrative of the interfaith movement to truly embody the welcome diversity they so proudly proclaim. It's not enough to pay dues and sit in the audience. We have to show up and act as if we're qualified to serve as leaders because we are. 2008 Parliament, we did that ourselves with our tradition,
Hmm.
bringing Wicca forward as a world religion. We're going to do that. We work with the Parliament of World Religions. We've talked a lot about this. My own career, Pagan Interfaith Embassy, was one of the very first projects I took on.
Yeah,
So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the way that this has been phrased is very insightful. That we must act as though we belong at the table, not just be in the room, not even just be at the table. We must act like we belong there because we do.
Right,
We
and
must
people,
act the part. We must embody the part. Um, and we must be mindful of the way we're being perceived. It's not. I mean, there are results that come from these actions, and so we must also think about them. I think how we
I
present
agree.
ourselves, how we interact, like interfaith language. We've talked many times about interfaith language and how much easier it is to communicate with people from different religions if you're using language they already understand, even if it isn't what you might use in your everyday communication. I think that's an important part of this equation, that we
So,
make it a point not to put up walls that don't need to be there.
so Parliament of World Religions, August 14th to the 18th, I think is going to be the largest interfaith gathering of its kind this time. It's tremendously going to be impactful, and I think we need to be there. And we are.
Hmm.
We're going to be there in big numbers, but I think we continue this conversation. I think this is very important. And
Yes.
And I have another statement. If you need, if they won't give you a seat at the table, bring your chair. And if they won't let you be at their table, maybe we need to start thinking about how to build some of our own interfaith tables.
Hmm.
I'm a big believer in building your own table. I've done that a lot. Okay, this one I actually disagree with this a little bit. I mean, I've been fighting this, and that's pagans putting pressure on religious reporters who only write about pagans for stock holiday pieces. We all know the articles corporate media outlets post every year on pagan roots of kissing on the etc., written by writers who never mention living pagans in any of their religion coverage.
Well, if we want them to mention us, we have to let them know we're here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, things like sending out our own press releases, which we have often done, but not waiting for them to contact us. But that's not the same thing as pressuring them. I'm not sure they need pressure. I think they might be quite happy to cover the pagan community more if they had more visibility of it.
And they go on to talk about, actual pagan reporting news by donating to Wild Hunts, for instance. Yeah, they're doing a great job. And they talk about contact news outlets with their own stories. And we're doing this. This is the Daily Spell, Pagan
Hmm.
World TV, Pagan Tonight Radio has always been about having our own press. So while we can pressure those reporters, but I do note that when I went to go buy advertising through PR to have our articles put into the system, I was turned down. We're
Hmm.
still doing that. So there is, I don't think, pressure on the reporters, but I do think there needs to be pressure on the system to allow us access
Hmm.
to those tools. And
And
that's a
that's a
little
very
bit,
important distinction.
yeah, and then we need to access and we can put out our own PR wires and things of that nature. So I think that's very important. Earlier, you liked this one, and I'm going to let you explain it. So I'm going to read it. Pagans turning to ancient texts, not an attempt to return to some pure paganism of the past, but as inspiration for modern practice intrinsically based in our own times.
My thought on that, and I've said it many times, is that we're here now.
Right.
We are modern people in the modern world. We are even if we pretend otherwise, we're being inspired in many cases by the past, but we are not and cannot recreate it. If we claim we're recreating it, we're lying to ourselves. We're creating something new that is coming from the past in many cases, and not always from the past. There are a number of aspects of paganism that are very much living traditions, but there are a lot of people who seem to discount, or I should say a certain segment, who discount the fact that we are here now, and our circumstances are not necessarily those of the remote past. In many cases, we don't have the idea of slavishly imitating someone else, I think, is a terrible mistake because we're not those people. Being inspired by them, yes, absolutely. I think that can be very important. Um, but the idea that I think it comes partly from the idea that some people have that you cannot change things, that they must be exactly the same as they once were, and that was never true. Um, I used to know someone who was into Kemetic Reconstructionism, a particular kind of Kemetic Reconstructionism, who um, hated any deviation from what they believed had been the practice of the old kingdom of Egypt, as if we have that much information about the practices of the old kingdom of Egypt. But the thing is, if you look at Egyptian religion over the course of the several thousand years that we know details about it, it was constantly changing. And it was also very local. What you would find in one part of Egypt was not what you'd find in another. And this idea that you have to exactly recreate something does not, in fact, recreate it, because that's not how these cultures were at all. They were constantly moving, constantly evolving, constantly mixing. There are a lot of people who hate the idea of mixing pantheons, but that wasn't actually true of the ancient peoples. They often did. And there's plenty of evidence to say so. Um, so yes, I totally agree with this point that that we must focus on what we are doing here, now, and in the future, because that is what is in our hand to do.
I think he says it great. Let's turn away from fetishizing past practitioners, accept that we belong to new religious movements inspired by ancient religions, not the ancient religions themselves. And by letting our ongoing study of the old text we love prod us into building contemporary practice that bloom in our own era. And that is probably the biggest divide inside the pagan world, inside interfaith, especially like the parliament, because there is a group representing, and it's not very American because we don't have this, but it's very European, and I see it in Asia and parts of Africa as well, is the idea of living indigenous religions that want to be
Hmm.
protected under that pagan label, and where they see a lot of what we're doing, such as modern Wicca, which, while may have its roots in ancient, is very much a living modern religion.
Hmm.
And that is a real big divide. When you get into interfaith work, that we talked about earlier, those are the two differences. Is it an ongoing indigenous religion, or is it being reconstructed, or is it just a new faith based on these old premises? And that shows you, it makes it us less of a single umbrella when it comes to these bigger organizations. But it doesn't
Hmm.
mean we can't work together, but it does mean we have to recognize what we are.
Well, I think that's a very important point because we must acknowledge the fact that there are different opinions on this, and that doesn't mean we have to be enemies just
Hmm.
because we have different ways of looking at it. But I am very much of the opinion that where we are and where we're going is what we must focus on. A lot of people like to say you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been, but that's absolutely not true. You can look at many of the other world's religions, and it won't take you long to notice that they do not remember where they've been, but they know where they're going. And if there have been times when I lived in Chicago, for example, there were times I didn't really know where I was or how I got there, but I knew the street system and I could find my way to where I needed to go. Um, we need, I think, to be mindful of where we are now and where we wish to go.
Um, okay, so let me talk about it. So, good point. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, if some people feel that magic is an international language, I think there's some international aspects, just like breathing is international. All humans practice it. Any humans that don't practice breathing are usually what? Dead. Um, but the meditation practices underneath it can be very uniquely cultural of how they took control of their breath. So while everybody can breathe, everybody can practice magic. How you practice that breath, there's a lot of cultures that have a lot more control, a lot more ideology of how they deal with their breath. Hmm? And I think that's true of magic too. I think that everybody has to breathe, but how we breathe, and Americans are notoriously fast-winded, they call them, because we breathe so fast because we're so excited all the time. Patricia mentioned the old ways. Sidwin, Sidwer, in ancient texts, we really only have pieces of these to begin with, but we gain from them is amazing. That's true. I agree with that. We only
Mhm.
have pieces of them, and we're finding more all the time.
That's true.
Okay.
In a few cases, that I mean, we know a lot more about Egyptian or Greek religion or Roman religion because they wrote so much down. But that many other religions of antiquity, we have very, very little actually surviving from it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, welcome, Diana. We have to be careful. I think we have to be careful, among other things, to assume that that what we have is either necessarily universal for its time or encyclopedic for its time. I everything that I have seen in the study of antiquity in those places more toward the Mediterranean, which left enough information to be studied, or in places like India and Asia, um, these things were very local and very variable. Um, and I think often we try to make them. I think one of the problems that the modern pagan community has is that it's unavoidably influenced by Judeo Christianity because it's surrounded by it. And therefore, they like to think that there's some absolute standard in pagan religions, which almost never was the case. They were not this, they did not have um, that central D&D guidebook that everything had to align to. And almost any of them, you'll find places where they drastically contradict each other depending on where you are. And they were just okay with that. They were certainly not unaware of it. And Diana makes the comment that it's like a dialect, and it really is.
I think so.
I mean, if you speak English, the question is, what English do you speak? Because someone from Scotland is not speaking necessarily the same English as someone from England, or someone from California, or someone from Florida, or someone from New Zealand, or someone from South Africa. All of these dialects are different, and some of them are very different. In fact, I mentioned Scotland. There's a bit of an argument over whether Scottish is a dialect of English or a language unto itself. I tend to feel the latter. But pagan religion is that same way. It was very variable, and still is.
All right, let's get on to the next one. I think this is something we can come back and revisit. Number 4, pagan organization make openness the norm instead of the exception, especially regarding sexual abuse. This is an interesting one. It's easy for us to take churches for cover up of the sins of the clergy, but we know about wrongdoing. Because they are major religions with vast numbers of members and large amounts of media scrutiny that publicize the crimes. In the byways of a relatively tiny pagan world, cover-ups are easier. Yeah, but when they hit the press, we've seen them. They rip through so much harder. They're much more harder on us. And they're saying, let's not emulate the impulse larger religions instead of brave enough to oust abusers and go public with the details. I think so, but you gotta be careful. I mean, I really was active against Kenny Klein, who was convicted, who was eventually died in prison. Everybody should be, people sat with him for 30 years. He was a photographer, and we don't know. We never found out if any of those pictures, where they came from, because the government doesn't allow the victims of these to ever know they were victims. So we don't know. So a lot of them, if they get caught, we don't know. So, and there's all sorts of prejudice. So yeah, I think we do. I think we do a pretty good job, but I don't think we can really talk about this in a 2-second piece or a 2-minute piece.
Well, that's true. There are complexities.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it's simple to do this, but sometimes it's not. I mean, one of the things that I remember was a certain high priest who was known for physically assaulting women, not sexually, but physically. And many of the women who he assaulted really wanted this brought out in public until it was. And then they were not willing to go to court to back it up, which left the people who had brought it out in public in a very exposed position when he sued for libel.
We barely, let's be honest, it was us who did it.
It was us, yes.
Roundtable Magazine. We did an expose. And a lot of people
we did survive, but no thanks to the people who asked us to bring this information out for the most part. I mean, even what I think was the worst one, which was a 17-year-old girl who he had throttled in a public place, but her mother would not allow her to come forward because the mother worked in a bank, and this was many years ago, and the mother felt that the connection would ruin her life and her finances, and she was probably right. But that does complicate things.
And there's a lot of people who don't want the police involved into various reasons. I will say having the marijuana culture legalized is going to make that easier.
I agree.
I think that was the big sin. I think we should have a talk about that and maybe talk about that show.
Yeah.
All right, let me move on to the next one. And this one is especially important to me. And it's a fine line for us, I think it's going to be. pagans abandoning right-wing tropes of our glorious ancestors and warrior culture. This is a really tricky one because I've seen it. Some aspects of modern paganism are redeemably rooted in racialistic nationalism in the 19th century. I agree. The recurring rhetoric focused on ancestry and violence is hardwired in so many subsets of American paganism that its putatively not racist groups sometimes share rhetoric with the far right groups from which they attempt to distance themselves. Let's emphasize elements of paganism that aren't repackaging root and Boden, blood and soil ideology. Oh my gosh! If somebody tells me again the gods are in your blood, that is like one of the worst things I have. But
Yeah.
it is hard because I'm actually a warrior culture. I'm part of a warrior culture, and we praise our ancestors as well.
Oh, yes.
So that's a fine line, but we do not believe in blood and soil. And actually, there's a member of our leadership, very, very high, who does practice the idea of blood and your gods are in the blood, and you should practice only appropriate gods. And they're not right wing at all, not by their own tropes, not by their own standards. They use it as a way to say, stick to your own gear, and you should never practice those things that are of other cultures. So they use cultural appropriation as a weapon too. So it's just not right wing, but it is also left wing who are working in this idea of non-cultural appropriation, that you should be practicing the gods of your blood, which I've seen it. And we saw it with Theocon came down, tumbling down a lot because of what they did to Witch Dr. Utu and a number of people who happen not to be the right color in their opinion. Let's be honest. They made a racist statement saying there was cultural appropriation by white people, which it was nothing of the sort.
Well, it was, as I recall, a number of suburban white Californians who were very upset about this cultural appropriation they were insisting on, who cannot have ever had any experience with the religions they were talking about, which are Afro-diasporic religions, because they've always had ethnic diversity, at least in the Americas. There's nothing at all odd about the fact that people from different ethnic backgrounds are practicing Afro-diasporic religion. I mean, it's been the case for generations. And the fact that they were upset about this actually shows that they didn't even bother to look at the religion that they were complaining about.
And I think at the end of the day, what they got in exchange was they lost one of the most powerful and most influential conferences on the West Coast. And I think that is. This one's funny.
I'm not a great fan of the idea of cultural appropriation the way it's normally discussed in the first place. But
so I'd like to talk with people who believe that the gods are in the blood. I think it's time for us to have some debates. The Daily Spell is going to do that. And what we're going to do is bring you these subjects as often as we can. People are asking us if we're going to read nightly. We're going to try. We need people who want to become part of our team, who will take on days, so we're not doing it all the time. This is an ensemble piece. I plan to be deeply involved with it, and this is kind of how we've built other projects that have taken over and changed how the community sees itself. Pagans, number 2, pagans not using one type of inclusion to deflect criticism of other types of exclusion. Ooh. The fact that roots of modern pagans include hoary racialist nationalism, unfortunately, also means racism lingers in many of today's organizations, even those that publicly market themselves as exclusives. Yeah, I've seen that. Given that race issues haven't continued to be the elephant in the pagan room, it's important that we face them head on instead of deflecting them. And I think that's true. And I think it's also true of sexual orientation. I think it is also not just racism. I think it's diversity in a lot of different forms. But, and then you get on the other side of that being gatekeeping. No, you have a right to protect your resources for those people who are following your path. Yeah, but you don't need, but you can't just block that path arbitrarily. I know a lot of us do. A lot of them do. I mean, that's not uncommon. Especially the smaller the group, more likely that they're not going to have systems for Can you talk to that? Because you've been dealing with that a lot. And the next one is really interesting.
Um, well, I'm not sure what to say except that the tradition that I come from, which I am chancellor of, is very strong on the concept of diversity because we've always been strong on it. I come from a multiracial family. The tradition was not built from one ethnic background. And that aspect of joining cultures together is a lot of what makes Corellianism Corellianism. And when you talk about the gods are in your blood, what gods would be in my blood? Because it comes from all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
What I was taught as a child is the idea that multi-ethnic societies are far more inventive, far more resilient, and far stronger, historically speaking, than those that have tried to be exclusive. And there's no one, or very few, unless they were totally geographically isolated, who were actually all that exclusive. But I think that diversity is vitally important for our future, and that we need to encourage it. And I'm not quite sure what else to say for it, but that's
Yeah. Well, it
I'm
ties
very
into
proud of the Corellian tradition for that.
so the next one with pagan national level organization electing all biopic, black, independent, people of color, indigenous, I think it's black, indigenous,
Yeah.
people of color leadership. Should elect all biopic leadership. I don't necessarily agree that you have to elect them all there, but yeah, you bring them
It
in.
would be nice to see more.
Absolutely, and maybe there are organizations that need it 100%.
Oh, yes. I think it depends on the organization.
Right. And this to let them have their last say. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I sometimes ask when will be enough women on the Supreme Court, and I say when there are 9. People are always shocked, but there have been 9 men, and nobody's ever raised a question about that.
No, that's completely true.
And it is even suggested that pagan Americans should consider electing a full array of leaders who aren't white set, soft, reverse racism signs. Bring out we're only considered qualification, not race belts. That's not true. That's not, that. The idea of being colorblind is not good. I've learned that. We don't have any non-white member admissions. That I've seen, and I think it's the way they gather. And I especially believe that people who believe, oh, the gods are in your blood. So I think that is an innate racism on the left as well as the right. If electing all people of color leadership is considered racist, why aren't those endless all-white leadership teams inherently racist? What
No,
about
the answer is that they are.
And what about qualification chosen in an important way always end up selecting only white winners? Well, that's true. What about the organization tracks prospective white members and repels prospective biopic ones? And they want to make a link change in lingering American paganism. I feel very strongly that we've done this. We're doing this. I feel like in my world we have already begun this process. I think
I totally agree.
When we go to the Parliament in August 14th to 18th, we're going to have not just American representation and just not American white population. We're going to have a diverse population just from the United States, and then we're going to be adding European populations, African members, both white and I expect we'll have other African members, and also Philippine members are coming over, and we expect a lot of it. So I think we do really well, but we're not a national level organization. We're a global level organization, and we're one of the few that can actually to be really state that we are global in our nature. We have members in multiple countries. And not a lot of the other pagan groups can really say that they're global. A lot of them say they're international, but we're global. And there's a difference. So that helps. And the Daily Spell's been covering all this type of news since 1998. Oh my God, how many different things we've done. So that's, I think, a very good article. I think it's a great thing to state.
Yeah, I think it
Um,
was a very solid article.
I do. I think it is. Um, let's see. I want to see if anyone. I know some people are talking. I like that. Somebody mentioned there might be a Mohawk of the. I cannot pronounce that name, but I'm not even going to try. Um,
Akwesasne
yeah,
Reservation.
yeah. And so they were talking about that. That they're a member of that. Some people say they need to hear that. Oh, thank you, Stuart. Diversity is key. Much as biological organisms require diversity, if not, disabilities and mutations are detrimental. Um, there we go. So we have that. So I think that's a really great start. I think covering that article, we're going to cover more of it, but I think that was needed to be addressed, and I really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yes,
right.
yes, I would have to agree.
So we're going to cover more things. We want to cover crowdfunding. If you're in a crowdfunding project, talk to us about our groups. One of the things I want to do about local community. Tomorrow I'll be putting out another statement because recently I've asked for. I said I need organizing. I love the effect of being right there for these sort of moments of creating, time. So we're going to talk about more things as we can. We enjoy it. We're going to have a guest if you want to be a guest. If you have something to say, editorial, let us start using the Daily Spell as a platform, as we always have, that is it's so good to the world, to begin a conversation and let the pagan voices of the world be heard. That's what we do. Um, so you really quick. It's not on my page. Did I leave it on my phone? I want to see really quick. And Don's doing. We are doing that. We also are planning to. We've got this idea of how we're going to kind of increase our ability. I'm checking really quick. No. 12:08 for the night. 13 backers. 20 days to go.
Yay.
And we're nice to get it filled in 1 hour, and we keep going on.
I'd like to take a moment to remark on a comment in the chat room that Diana has made.
Mm-hmm.
Comparing diversity in society organization um, to biology. When things inbreed, um, it can result in a lot of detrimental mutations and disabilities down the line. And she's pointing out this is not only biological, but also social. And I totally agree. I think if you look at those societies which have tried to be um, single ethnicity societies, for want of a better way to put it, they do end up in their way very inbred and very rigid. And then when they eventually do break out of that, it's far more traumatic than it ever needed to be.
Well, English monarchy, the monarchy of Europe fell into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hemophilia, oversized jaws.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to keep all of that tied. And then we see it in the Egyptians. Everybody talks about how smart the Egyptians is, but we see more and more of those inbred effects, don't we?
Oh yeah, they totally did not realize apparently that inbreeding was detrimental. What they were attributing it to, I can't imagine. But the royal families seem to have a lot of bad effects from that
Mm-hmm.
in Egypt. But then the Europeans, centuries later, millennia later, didn't realize it either. So we can't really be too surprised that the Egyptians didn't catch it when people didn't catch it 300 years ago. But yes, you can see the effect of that very clearly. Um, and yes, it is the same in a society as it is in a family line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the premier example of that in a society is Spain.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Spain in the Middle Ages versus Spain after the expulsion of the Moors and the expulsion of the Jews and the conquest of the Americas, it does not go uphill, it goes downhill, and eventually becomes a very dystopian country. And when
Hmm.
they finally did break out of it, took much of the 20th century and brought them a tremendous amount of strife to break those rigidities that they had created. Where other more flexible societies were able to move into the modern world with less trauma.
There you go. Absolutely. So, wow, that's quite deep. So we're willing to talk about anything and everything. So the Daily Spell is about, bringing the mirror to it. And I think today was a great thing for people wanting. We want a lot of things. I expect a lot for the new year. We're already moving very, very quickly into it. Um, so I think I want to leave tonight. Well, maybe this will be part of it. Talk to us, folks. So why don't we go ahead and bring this close? And what I think we want is a prayer, right, John?
Certainly.
And so why don't we close with a prayer? And I want to thank everybody for coming.
Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, powers of the universe in all your many names, we ask you to aid us and to guide us as we go forward in this year, to help us to embody those traits that we admire and desire to live, and to help us to release those things that hold us back. May we become the people we desire to be and the best versions of ourselves, beloved ones. Help us in this as we go forward, we pray you. So mote it be. And there you go.